the young and the restless spoilers. The growing tension in Genoa City had reached an unbearable height, and at the center of it all was the reckless ambition of Audra, a woman who had never been satisfied playing by the rules and who relished provoking outrage wherever she went. Her latest stunt was no exception, for in a shocking and brazen display, she had chosen to publicly declare her love for Kyle, ignoring every boundary of decency and decorum. Even in the presence of Claire, who had already endured more than enough manipulations and schemes, the crowd reacted with visible discomfort, murmurs filling the air as Audra's words sliced through the fragile peace like a knife. It was not the declaration of a woman in love, it was a declaration of war, calculated and designed to destabilize, to wound, to provoke. But even as she reveled in the discomfort she caused, Audra underestimated just how far Kyle was willing to go to protect the life he envisioned with Claire. For him, this was no longer just about romance or family, it was about the survival of everything he had built and everything he had promised himself he would never lose again. Audra's motives were as transparent as they were destructive. She wanted to shatter Claire, to dismantle her happiness piece by piece, to destroy any sense of security she had found in Kyle's arms. There was a cruelty in her that went beyond jealousy. It was the determination of someone who could not bear to be excluded, who thrived on controlling outcomes and manipulating emotions. Yet, despite her confidence, the truth loomed like a storm cloud. Audra's plan was destined to fail. For all her cleverness and daring, she underestimated the strength of Kyle and Claire's bond, and she miscalculated the fury she was awakening in a man who had already given her far too many warnings. Kyle had made it clear to her in no uncertain terms, if she tried to destroy his relationship, she would face consequences that even she could not charm her way out of. But instead of heeding the warning, Audra laughed in his face, twisting his threats into opportunities to show off her own fearlessness, as though daring him to cross a line he had never crossed before. Her arrogance grew darker when she chose to employ her most manipulative weapon yet, the lie of a pregnancy. With a calculated look and a voice dripping with false vulnerability, Audra insinuated that she was carrying Kyle's child, trying to bind him to her in a trap that she believed would terrify him into submission. But Kyle was no longer the man who could be easily cornered. He recognized the ploy for what it was, a desperate attempt to regain power over Hyman. The realization filled him not with guilt, but with an icy determination to end her games once and for all. That was the moment when Kyle's resolve hardened into something far more dangerous. If Audra thought she could intimidate him, she was wrong. If she thought she could win, she was delusional. And if she thought her lies would tether him, she had just triggered the darkest thoughts he had ever dared to entertain. For Kyle, the future was crystal clear. He would marry Claire. He would build a life with her, free from the venom of those who tried to dismantle their love. Nothing and no one, least of all Audra, would stand in his way. Every fiber of his being screamed with the urgency of this commitment. He had already made mistakes in his life, and he knew that some of them had cost him dearly. But he was no longer afraid of paying the price for protecting what mattered most. His mistakes had taught him the value of loyalty, the fragility of trust, and the cost of letting manipulators like Audra linger too long. Now he understood that action was the only language Audra would ever respond to, and he was prepared to speak it fluently, no matter how much it endangered his own soul. The darkest thought crept into Kyle's mind like an uninvited guest, and once there, it refused to leave. If Audra could not be reasoned with, perhaps she needed to be eliminated. Kyle had never imagined himself capable of such violence. Murder had always been the line that separated men from monsters, a line he had believed he would never approach. Yet in the quiet hours, in the shadow of Audra's escalating threats, he began to wonder if erasing her from his world might be the only way to secure the life he longed for with Claire. He justified the thought by reminding himself of all the chaos Audra had already unleashed, all the pain she had inflicted, and all the danger she posed to the stability of his family. Was it truly murder if it was the only way to stop her before she destroyed more lives? The rationalizations came easily, too easily, and that frightened him almost as much as the thought itself. But as Audra continued her charade, Kyle's fear began to transform into something sharper. He would not allow her to toy with his future. He would not allow her to steal the life he had promised Claire. Whether through exposure, exile, or something far more permanent, Audra would have to disappear. He thought about how he could orchestrate it, how he could remove her from the equation without leaving traces that would circle back to him. The possibilities swirled in his mind, dark and tempting, as he measured the risks against the rewards. For the first time, Kyle truly understood the abyss that opened when one allowed hatred and desperation to dictate choices, and though he teetered dangerously close to falling in, he did not retreat. He embraced the danger because he believed his love for Claire was worth everything in his soul. Claire, innocent in all of this, remained unaware of just how far Kyle's thoughts had traveled. To her, his devotion was the anchor that kept her steady amid Audra's cruelty. She trusted him, she loved him, and she believed in the vision they were building together. The irony was that Kyle's darkest temptations sprang not from a lack of love, but from an excess of it. He loved her so much that he would risk anything to protect her, even if it meant stepping into shadows that he had spent his entire life avoiding. And as he looked at Claire, her smile radiant, her heart open, he swore to himself that nothing, not even the threat of blood on his hands, would keep him from placing a ring on her finger and binding her life to his forever. Meanwhile, Audra basked in her defiance, delighting in the chaos she stirred, blind to the storm she was unleashing within Kyle. She believed she held the upper hand, that her boldness and manipulations would make her untouchable. But in truth, she was dancing on the edge of a blade, and every step she took brought her closer to the moment when Kyle would decide he had no choice left. Her games were no longer just about love or rivalry. They had become a matter of survival, though she had yet to realize it. And when she finally did, it might already be too late. The weight of the decision pressed on Kyle like a suffocating fog, heavier with each passing hour as night closed in on Genoa City. Murder was the ultimate taboo, the final line one could cross, and Kyle had always believed himself incapable of stepping into that abyss. Yet here he stood, trembling at the edge of it, his mind a battlefield where love and obsession clashed against morality and self-preservation. To kill someone was unthinkable, but in the twisted labyrinth Audra had created with her lies, her provocations, and now her ties to Victor, Kyle found himself wondering if perhaps the unthinkable had become unavoidable. The very idea horrified him, and yet the thought refused to let him go. He told himself that all of this was for Claire, that the sanctity of their future justified his darkest temptation, but deep down he knew that if he acted on it, he would not just be ending Audra's life, would be obliterating his own. The tragedy of it all was that Audra was not even moving of her own accord anymore. She had surrendered herself to Victor's command, becoming a pawn in his ruthless games, a weapon aimed directly at Kyle and Claire's fragile happiness. By obeying Victor, Audra had sealed her fate, choosing manipulation and deceit over retreat, fanning the flames of Kyle's growing fury. Perhaps she believed Victor would protect her. Perhaps she thought her cunning would shield her from consequences. But she failed to see the desperation in Kyle's eyes, the consuming rage that could no longer be contained. She believed herself untouchable because of Victor's backing, but Victor was a man who valued utility above loyalty, and pawns were always expendable. In truth, Audra was more vulnerable than she had ever been, standing at the mercy of a man whose love had twisted into something as sharp and dangerous as a blade. Claire, blissfully unaware of how dark Kyle's thoughts had become, stood as the tragic center of this storm. Her dreams of a life with Kyle were built on love and trust, on a vision of happiness unmarred by betrayal or blood. If she ever learned that the man she adored had contemplated murder, let alone committed it, her world would collapse in an instant. She could never reconcile the man who held her hand so tenderly with a killer lurking in the shadows. Kyle knew this, and the knowledge only deepened his torment. He wanted to protect Claire, to shield her from Audra's venom, but how could he protect her without destroying himself in the process? The paradox consumed him, leaving him caught between two future zones, where he lost Claire to Audra's manipulations, and one where he lost her to the truth of what he had done. The night fell heavy, cloaking the city in silence, broken only by the beating of Kyle's heart. Alone, pacing the floor with trembling hands and a mind racing through scenarios, he felt the magnitude of his choice closing in. The clock ticked like a judge's gavel, each second demanding an answer. Would he act, or would he let fate take its course? Images flashed before him: Audra, laughing with cruel delight, Claire smiling with innocent trust, Victor pulling strings from the shadows. In those visions, Kyle saw the stakes with brutal clarity. If he allowed Audra to persist, She would poison everything he and Claire had built. But if he chose the unthinkable, if he silenced Audra forever, then he would shatter Claire's dreams with a single act of blood. The irony was unbearable. To save his love, he might have to destroy it. Murder was no longer just a fantasy, and his Mindit had become a possibility, looming over him with the inevitability of a storm. He knew that once the decision was made, there would be no turning back. The night stretched before him like a tightrope, every step pulling him closer to the moment when thought became action. His breath came heavy, his resolve wavering, and yet his determination remained intact. He had vowed to marry Claire, and he had vowed to eliminate anything that stood in their way. Now those vows collided in a way he could never have anticipated. When the darkness finally settled, when the city's lights dimmed and the world seemed to hold its breath, Kyle knew that he would have to choose. Would he find another way to neutralize Audra, or would he cross the line that would forever mark him as a killer? The choice was his, but the cost no matter. Which path he chose would haunt him for the rest of his life.